The Odyssey contains two temptations. One screams, the other whispers. Psychologists have spent decades studying the first one. Most people are being destroyed by the second. 3,000 years ago, Homer put both of them in the same story. One is the Sirens, the other is something far more dangerous. Somewhere off the coast of an island no one can find on a map, a man is screaming to be let loose. He's tied to the mast of his own ship. His crew's ears are packed with beeswax. And the thing making him scream isn't pain. It's the most beautiful sound he's ever heard. This is Odysseus. And what he does, before he even hears the sirens sing, is one of the most important psychological insights ever put into a story, because Odysseus knows something uncomfortable about human nature. He knows that the person making a decision today is not always the same person who has to live with it tomorrow. So before the ship reaches the Sirens, he gives his crew strict instructions. No matter what happens, no matter what he says, no matter how much he begs, do not untie him. The moment he hears the song, he loses the right to choose. That's not confidence, it's the opposite. It's a deliberate admission that future Odysseus cannot be trusted. You've experienced this yourself. You promise you'll wake up early tomorrow. You promise you'll save money. You promise you'll avoid that distraction, that habit, that temptation. Then tomorrow arrives, and suddenly the thing you swore you'd avoid feels impossible to resist. Psychologists call this hyperbolic discounting, the tendency to value immediate rewards more than future consequences, even when we know better. In the calm moments, the future matters. In the emotional moments, the present wins. Odysseus understood this long before psychology had a name for it. Most people think they're one person making choices. Behavioral psychology suggests something stranger. You're not one self, you're a series of selves. And today's self is constantly negotiating with tomorrow's self. The problem is that tomorrow's self never gets a vote. Researchers like Walter Mischel explored this idea through the famous marshmallow experiments. Later, economist George Ainsley built mathematical models around the same problem. Why do we make plans we fail to follow? Why do intelligent people repeatedly choose outcomes they know they'll regret? Because the self making the plan and the self facing the temptation often want different things. Odysseus' solution wasn't more willpower, it was design. He created a system that prevented future him from making a bad decision. Years later, economist Thomas Schelling gave this strategy a name, the Ulysses contract, a commitment made by your rational self specifically to limit the freedom of your future, tempted self. Once you start looking for it, you see modern versions everywhere. Locking money into savings accounts, deleting distracting apps before exam season, giving your car keys to a friend before you start drinking, making a public promise that would be embarrassing to break. The common thread isn't discipline. It's understanding that temptation is easier to defeat before it arrives than during it. And if that were the only lesson hidden in the Odyssey, it would already be a remarkable story. But Homer gives us a second temptation, one that's quieter, one that's harder to recognize, and arguably one that's far more dangerous. Before the Sirens, before the Cyclops, before many of the Odyssey's most famous dangers, Odysseus' crew lands on the island of the Lotus-Eaters. The men who eat the lotus don't become violent, they don't become irrational, they don't scream, they simply stop caring. They forget home, they forget their purpose, they forget the journey entirely. And when Odysseus tries to bring them back to the ship, they resist, not because they're suffering, because they don't want to leave. This is a completely different psychological trap. The Sirens represent temptation as an active pull towards something desirable. The lotus represents something quieter, escapism, avoidance, the desire not to chase pleasure but to stop feeling discomfort. Psychologists distinguish between approach motivation and avoidance motivation. Approach motivation pushes us toward rewards. Avoidance motivation pulls us away from pain. The Lotus-Eaters aren't pursuing excitement, they're escaping responsibility, escaping grief, escaping uncertainty, escaping the unfinished parts of their lives waiting for them back home. And that's what makes the Lotus so dangerous, because it works, at least in the short term. Researchers today call this avoidance coping, a behavior used not because it solves a problem, but because it temporarily makes the problem disappear from awareness. The relief becomes rewarding, and because the relief is rewarding, the behavior gets repeated. Nothing improves. But the escape becomes harder to leave. The longer you stay, the less you remember why you wanted to leave in the first place. And this is where the Odyssey reveals something most modern self-help advice completely misses. Not all temptations have the same shape, which means they don't require the same solution. Against a siren, A temptation you can see coming, a temptation that arrives at a specific moment. The answer is precommitment. Build the mast before you hear the song. Remove the choice before emotions take over. But you can't tie yourself to a mast against the lotus. There is no obvious moment of temptation, no dramatic decision, no warning, just a slow drift away from engagement with your own life. The Odyssey's answer to that problem is different. It isn't restraint, it's rescue. Someone else has to notice. Someone else has to recognize what's happening. Someone else has to pull you back to the ship. Put these two episodes side by side, and a fascinating pattern emerges. The Sirens teach us that some temptations require systems. The Lotus-Eaters teach us that some temptations require people. One is solved through design, the other through connection. Neither is solved through willpower alone. That's why the Odyssey feels surprisingly modern. 3,000 years before neuroscience, 3,000 years before behavioral economics, 3,000 years before psychology became a science, Homer understood something many people still struggle to understand today. Willpower isn't the point. Design is, community is, structure is. Odysseus doesn't survive because he's stronger than everyone else. He survives because he knows where strength will fail, and he plans for it. The ship sails on. Eventually, Odysseus reaches Ithaca. Not because he became immune to temptation, not because he conquered human nature, but because at two crucial moments, he and the people around him built the right solution for the right problem. And that's probably the most useful lesson hidden inside a 3,000-year-old poem. The goal was never to become someone who can't be tempted. That person doesn't exist. The goal is to know what kind of temptation you're facing. Is it a siren? Then build the mast. Is it a lotus? Then find the crew. And do it before you're close enough to hear the song. Thanks for watching. Please like, share, and subscribe to the channel.